There was a guy in 1923 Germany named Heinrich who did everything right. He saved his entire career. He lived below his means. He kept his money in the bank because that's what responsible people did. By 1922, he had enough in savings to buy two houses. By November of 1923, that same account could barely buy a loaf of bread, not because he made bad decisions, because the system he trusted redefined what his money was worth while he wasn't looking. I'm not telling you that story to scare you about hyperinflation. I'm telling you because Heinrich's catastrophe didn't happen overnight. It happened in slow motion. It was a compounding process that looked completely manageable at every individual step until suddenly it wasn't. And right now in 2026, something structurally identical is happening to millions of people who are following exactly the financial advice they were told to follow. The diversified portfolio, the high-yield savings account, the balanced allocation shifting toward bonds as you age. The whole playbook, and every single year they execute it correctly, they fall a little further behind people who understand what's actually happening underneath those numbers. Here's what I've spent the last several months trying to quantify. The gap between what conventional financial advice promises and what it actually delivers in an environment of persistent structural inflation isn't a rounding error. It's a wealth transfer, a quiet, legal, mathematically precise mechanism that moves purchasing power from people who play it safe into the portfolios of people who understand how the game actually works. And the cruelest part is that the people getting hurt the most are the ones who were trying hardest to do the right thing. Let me give you the framework I call the invisible wealth tax. It has three components and they compound on each other in a way that most people never see until they're staring at a retirement statement that should have another zero on it. The first component is the inflation gap, not the headline inflation number the government publishes. The actual cost of life inflation that affects the specific basket of goods a middle-income American buys. Healthcare, housing, education, groceries, and these categories have been inflating at 5 to 7% annually for a decade, sometimes faster. The headline CPI number averages in things like used electronics and apparel, which actually get cheaper over time, to produce a number that looks more palatable. But if you strip out the categories that are getting cheaper and focus on the categories that actually consume the majority of a middle-class budget, you're looking at a real purchasing power erosion of 5 to 6% per year for most households. Now here's where the conventional advice starts breaking down. A high-yield savings account right now pays around 4.5% in the best case. A standard bond allocation inside a balanced portfolio might return 3 to 4%. On paper, those numbers don't look catastrophic. You're earning something. The number in your account goes up every month, but if your actual cost of living is rising at 5 to 6% and your safe money is earning 3.5%, you are losing purchasing power at a rate of 1.5 to 2.5% every year. Every single year. And nobody sends you a bill. You just notice that the same life costs more and your savings feel like they buy less, and you assume that's just how things are. Let me put real numbers on this because the math is where it stops feeling abstract. Take a guy named Marcus. He's 40. He has $150,000 in a high-yield savings account, earning 4.5%, and another $150,000 in a diversified bond-heavy portfolio, returning around 4% blended. Looks responsible, balanced. By most financial advice standards, this is the model. His $300,000 generates about $13,000 per year in returns. But if his actual purchasing power is eroding at 5.5% annually, he's losing $16,500 per year in real terms. He's net negative $3,500 every year while thinking he's being disciplined. Over 10 years, that's $35,000 in real wealth he's lost while dutifully contributing to accounts that are technically growing. Over 20 years, the compounding of that gap produces a shortfall of over $100,000 in today's purchasing power, and Marcus is still getting congratulated for his savings rate. The second component of the invisible wealth tax is what I call the diversification illusion. Now, I want to be careful here because diversification is not wrong. It's incomplete in the way it's typically sold. The conventional wisdom is that you spread your money across asset classes to reduce risk. Stocks, bonds, international, real estate, cash. The idea is that when one thing goes down, something else goes up and your overall portfolio is protected. That's true in certain environments. It was especially true from 1980 to 2020 when falling interest rates were the dominant macro force, because falling rates lift almost every asset class simultaneously. Stocks go up, bonds go up, real estate goes up, everything goes up together. Diversification in that environment looked like genius because the whole board was winning. You couldn't lose. But here's what nobody explained when they sold you the diversification religion. In an environment of persistent structural inflation and elevated interest rates, that same correlation flips. Bonds lose value when rates are high. Cash loses purchasing power when inflation runs hot. International positions get suppressed by dollar strength. And the diversified portfolio, which was supposed to protect you, ends up being a basket of positions that are all getting quietly eroded simultaneously by the same macro force. You're not diversified against inflation. You're just divided among assets that all have the same fundamental vulnerability to it. Think about it like this. You have 6 locks on your front door, heavy-duty locks, very secure looking, except all 6 locks use the same master key. Someone with that key can walk right in. That's your diversified portfolio against structural inflation. The locks look different. They have different names. They're from different asset class manufacturers. But they all open with the same key, which is real interest rate environment. And right now, that key is working against you. The third component is the one people really resist. I call it the opportunity cost compounding penalty. This is where the math gets genuinely painful. Every dollar you put into a savings account earning 4.5% is a dollar that isn't compounding at 10 to 12% in a productive asset. Over 20 years, that difference is not linear. It's exponential. The $10,000 sitting in your savings account earning 4.5% becomes about $24,000. That same $10,000 in a broad market index earning a conservative 9% becomes $56,000. The gap is $32,000 on a single $10,000 allocation over 20 years. Most people following conventional balanced portfolio advice have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in suboptimal positions. And they're losing not just the annual return differential, but the compounding of that differential across decades. The invisible wealth tax isn't a one-time charge. And so it's a subscription fee you pay forever and never notice because the billing happens in slow motion. Now let me show you how these 3 components stack. Marcus has his $300,000. Component 1 costs him roughly $3,500 a year in real purchasing power. Component 2 means his portfolio doesn't protect him during inflationary cycles the way he thinks it does. Component 3 means the $150,000 in bonds and savings is generating maybe $6,000 less per year than it would in productive equities. That's $9,500 in combined annual wealth erosion and opportunity cost. Over 20 years compounded, Marcus doesn't just retire with less than he planned. He retires with roughly $400,000 to $500,000 less than someone who started with the exact same income, saved the exact same rate, and simply understood the mechanics of what they were building. Same discipline, dramatically different outcomes, because one person understood the tax and one person didn't. Let me tell you what the financial industry gets out of keeping this invisible. Banks make money on deposits. The spread between what they pay you on your savings account and what they earn on the loans they make with your money is pure profit. Your 4.5% earning account is funding loans at 7 to 8%. Every dollar you park in a savings account is more profitable to them than a dollar you invest in equities because they can't extract the same margin from your brokerage account. The incentive structure of traditional financial advice has never been perfectly aligned with your outcomes. It's been aligned with product profitability. They call it financial safety. The actuarial reality is that it's their business model. Hashin and the bond industry, trillions of dollars in fees and commissions have been built on the concept that bonds are the responsible half of a portfolio, that as you age, you should shift more and more of your allocation toward fixed income because it's less volatile. That's true. Bonds are less volatile, but volatility and risk are not the same thing. A bond that slowly loses purchasing power every year while generating a modest nominal return is not safe. It's a slow motion loss with less drama. The drama reduction is real. The safety isn't. Here's the psychological trap that makes this so hard to escape. The invisible wealth tax is structured to feel like nothing is wrong. Your savings account shows a higher number every month. Your bond fund shows modest positive returns. When your financial advisor sends you a quarterly report showing your diversified portfolio is performing in line with benchmarks, everything looks fine. Nothing triggers alarm. And that's exactly how the wealth transfer works. It doesn't look like a theft. It looks like responsible stewardship. You have to run the real inflation-adjusted math yourself to see what's actually happening to your purchasing power. And most people never do that math because nobody told them to, and the statements aren't designed to show it to them. This is the asymmetry between how wealthy people think about money and how everyone else thinks about money. The people who have already built real generational wealth think in terms of real returns, inflation-adjusted purchasing power. They don't celebrate a 4% savings account rate as a win in a 5% inflation environment. They see that for what it is, a negative real return dressed up in positive nominal clothing. Everyone else thinks about the number going up and feels good about it. Same objective reality, completely different psychological framework. And that framework difference produces compounding wealth divergence over decades. Let me introduce a concept I call the benchmark trap. Your financial advisor tells you your portfolio is performing in line with its benchmark, the 60-40 portfolio benchmark, the balanced fund benchmark. And technically that's true. Your portfolio is doing exactly what a 60% stocks, 40% bonds allocation is supposed to do. The benchmark itself is the problem. You're not being measured against inflation-adjusted purchasing power preservation. You're being measured against a reference portfolio that was designed in a different interest rate environment and has never been updated to reflect the structural inflation reality of the 2020s. You're winning the wrong race and nobody is telling you the race changed. Think about it like this. Imagine you're a runner. Your coach tells you you're performing at the 80th percentile for your training group. You feel great about that. What your coach didn't mention is that your training group runs on flat courses and you're about to enter a race with significant hills. Your performance relative to your benchmark tells you nothing meaningful about how you'll actually do in the environment you're going to face. So let's get to what actually works. Now here is the framework for dismantling the invisible wealth tax step by step. Step 1. Calculate your real return, not your nominal return. Take whatever your savings account or bond allocation is returning and subtract your personal inflation rate, not the CPI number, your actual cost of life increase over the last 3 years for the specific things you spend money on. For most middle-income households, that number is between 5 and 7%. If your safe money is earning less than that, you are paying the invisible wealth tax right now. You need to see this number clearly before you can make any intelligent decision about your allocation. Go do this calculation tonight, not next month. Tonight. Step 2, identify every dollar sitting in suboptimal positions and calculate the 20-year opportunity cost. Wait for every $50,000 sitting in a savings account or bond-heavy fund earning 4% in a 6% inflation environment. Run a simple compound growth comparison. $50,000 at 4% for 20 years versus $50,000 at 9% for 20 years. The gap will be between $80,000 and $120,000 on that single $50,000 allocation alone. Most people have multiple allocations that are suffering from this drag simultaneously. Add them all up. When you see the total 20-year opportunity cost of your current allocation, the emotional calculus for changing it shifts dramatically. It stops being a theoretical argument about asset classes and starts being a specific dollar amount you are choosing to give up. Step 3. Restructure your cash position to the minimum functional buffer and nothing more. You need 6 months of living expenses in liquid accessible savings. That is your emergency fund. Everything above that number is not safety, it's the invisible wealth tax in action. Every dollar above your 6-month buffer sitting in cash is a dollar paying you 4.5% nominal while eroding at 5 to 6% real. Identify that excess cash. Name it. Move it with a plan. The move doesn't have to be instant or all at once, but it needs to happen with deliberate timing and a clear destination. Step 4. Replace bond allocations with productive equity exposure calibrated to your actual time horizon, not your emotional comfort with volatility. The standard age-based bond allocation formula is a product of the 1970s, designed for a world where bonds yielded 8 to 10% and actually outpaced inflation. In the current rate environment, in why that formula is architecturally broken for anyone under 65 and arguably for anyone under 70. If you have 15 or more years until you need the money, a 40% bond allocation is not protecting you from risk. It is exposing you to the exact inflation risk it was supposed to hedge. Replace it with low-cost broad market equity index funds. Yes, it is more volatile on paper, but volatility is temporary and inflation-adjusted purchasing power destruction is permanent. Step 5. Measure every allocation against the right benchmark, not its asset class benchmark, its real inflation-adjusted purchasing power benchmark. Ask one question about every position in your portfolio. Is this money growing faster than my personal inflation rate? If the answer is no, that position is costing you wealth every year you hold it, regardless of what the nominal return statement says. This reframe is uncomfortable because it means some things you thought were safe are actually slowly destructive. That discomfort is valuable. It's the same discomfort Heinrich would have felt in 1921 if someone had shown him the real math on his bank account before it was too late. Here is the larger context that makes this urgent. The conditions creating the invisible wealth tax are not temporary. The structural inflation pressures driven by aging demographics, energy transition costs, deglobalization of supply chains, and persistent government deficit spending are not going away in the next 2 to 3 years. We are not in a cycle that will return to a low inflation equilibrium the way the 2010s were. We are in a structural environment where real returns require real equity exposure. Mana and the conventional advice architecture built for the 2000s is producing real losses in the 2000s for the people following it most faithfully. The irony is almost cruel. The people who did the homework, who read the articles, who followed the advice, who carefully diversified and rebalanced and kept their savings funded and stayed out of speculative assets. Those are the people paying the highest invisible wealth tax because those are the people with the most money sitting in the wrong positions. The person who never saved at all has nothing to erode. The person who took on too much risk and went heavily into equities throughout has been accidentally mostly protected. The person who followed every rule precisely is the one getting quietly taxed every single year. That is not a reason to abandon discipline. It is a reason to upgrade your understanding of what discipline means in this environment. Discipline in the 1980s meant staying the course in a bond-heavy balanced portfolio because real yields were high and inflation was falling. Discipline in 2026 means having the intellectual honesty to look at your real returns and make hard decisions about reallocating into assets that actually beat your cost of living. Doing nothing because your statements show positive numbers is not discipline. It is inertia dressed up in the language of patience. The gap between people who build real wealth and people who merely accumulate larger nominal numbers with slowly diminishing purchasing power comes down to one thing: whether you measure what your money can buy or whether you measure what your money can count. The number in your account is not your wealth. Your wealth is what that number controls in the real economy. And if that number is growing slower than the cost of the economy around it, you are getting poorer regardless of what the statement says. Go run the real math. Calculate your actual real return. Identify your invisible wealth tax. Then decide whether you're going to keep paying it or whether you're going to change the allocation that's generating it. Because the tax is real. It compounds every year. And the only people who don't know they're paying it are the ones who never looked. If this reframe changed how you see your portfolio, subscribe and let me know in the comments what your real return calculation came out to. And if you know someone following exactly the conventional playbook without running the inflation-adjusted math, why send them this video? Because the invisible wealth tax doesn't announce itself. That's what makes it invisible.